ever try eating with one of them?
Okay, so then I can watch the monitor.
St. Eligius. St. Elsewhere.
Oh, no, they say that I won't be able to watch the monitor.
News Brothers for A&B Sound, looking very sharp indeed to tell you about the Sharp video cassette recorder.
Mr. A and Mr. B bought out the last of these little beauties, so you've got your basic end-of-the-line clearance. The price has dropped to only $49.99 per month for 1 full year, no down payment, and interest-free.
This front-loading Sharp VCR features a 7-day program timer. Only a few left, so hurry on down.
It's clearance time at A&B.
Hey, I know just the movie we can rent. They saved Gidget's brain.
A&B Sound, Vancouver and Victoria.
BCTV, we're giving it all we got.
Good morning. When Opposition Leader Dave Barrett was physically ejected from the House yesterday, he said with more vehemence than I have ever seen him use before the following words.
Because of a government frightened of itself.
Mr. Barrett, we didn't quite get that clip, but before I speak to you this morning, if I may, and I understand that you have a new development to tell me very shortly about a threat from the Speaker, I want you and the audience to see what you said after you had been physically ejected from the House yesterday. And I hope we can see that now.
A little bit of Parliament died today. It died today because of a government frightened of itself.
Mr. Barrett, let's go back to the very beginning. When you came out of the House yesterday and you denounced this government, and I believe with a fair amount of credibility, that they had improperly muzzled you, shut you up, and prevented you from taking your proper part in the debate on an amendment on their principal bill, Bill 3, the Public Sector Restraint Act. Now, if you can, please explain to me why you were muzzled and who muzzled you and what you think is behind it.
This bill has not been debated for 1 month. 5 weeks ago, we were promised regulations. I adjourned the debate on this bill 1 month ago under the rules of the House as a designated speaker on a motion to have it postponed, the debate postponed. At no time ever before in the history of our House has there been an attempt to stop a designated speaker for using unlimited time. Even during the time when Bill Bennett ran around this province saying not a dime without debate, he knew that he had unlimited time to speak in the House under the designated speaker rule. Social Credit never tampered with that, nor did we.
In other words, you were the designated
That
speaker
is correct.
to continue to talk about Bill 3 when it was called back after it had been adjourned last month.
That is correct. I was the designated speaker on a motion, an amendment to the bill, second reading, to have the bill postponed for 6 months, as I pointed out that editorialists, radio broadcasters, television commentators had asked for. A 6 months hoist. There is no time limit for the leader of the opposition. None whatsoever.
Now, you were on your feet yesterday starting to speak and had spoken for some time.
No, I had not spoken. I stood up. I was immediately interrupted by Mr. Schroeder. The speaker was asked for a ruling. The speaker was interrupted by myself saying there can be no ruling. The speaker admitted to me and it's in Hansard that there was no previous ruling such as what he intended to do. He allowed some debate and then intimated he was going to bring in the ruling, and it is that point that I said I would not leave the chamber nor give up my right to speak. This is beyond the NDP and Social Credit, and I don't care how people voted who were watching this program. Deep in your heart, and you must understand that Parliament was abused last night by a government that threw away the rule book, that decided to make its own rules, and is telling British Columbians that they can make their own rules at a moment's notice.
When you were speaking, Harvey Schroeder got up and raised the point, did he not, that you were only entitled to a short speech, if any at all, because you were only speaking on an amendment to Bill 3.
That is correct, but it is clear in the rule book, Jack, that a designated speaker can be on bills, on amendments to bills, on the throne speech, and the budget speech.
Do you suggest there was collusion between the Speaker?
I suggest there was collusion. As far as I'm concerned, that speaker has no more right to be there in the best traditions of Parliament. Jack, when I came in the House yesterday, and this part is not publicly known to my knowledge, at least not too well. When I walked in the House yesterday, the whip had notified me that we were going back to Bill 3 after 1 month's absence. I immediately opened my desk and pulled my files out, piled them on top of the desk. The Speaker, Walter Davidson, signaled to me to put the files away. Bill 3 wouldn't be called. That's what I interpreted his signal. I turned to Gordon Hanson, our whip, and I said, is Bill 3 being called? The Speaker is indicating no. He said, yes, Dave, Bill 3 is being called. I put my files back on the desk and looked at the Speaker. The Speaker waved at me again and indicated that Bill 3 would not be called and sent me a note, which I have in my possession, saying, quote, trust me. He knew then, Jack, he knew then exactly what was going to happen.
He sent you a note?
He sent me a note saying, trust me, and I have that note in my possession. I ripped the note up, but it's still there. I've got it back, and it's intact. He knew then the decision had been made. It was in collusion, Jack. And then, during my standing on my rights, and remember, I'm leaving public life. I'm leaving politics. But as I stood there defending my right to speak, the clerk came to me and said that if I was physically ejected, I would be out for the session.
You were physically ejected.
The Speaker then called me to the chair and asked me if I had been warned. And I told him I had been warned, but I would not be threatened. I will not be threatened on my rights to speak in that legislature, and no one can treat duly elected members this way. I was then determined to stand there until I was physically touched, and I was. But they have backed off the rule about throwing me out for the session. They are making up rules as they go. That's when I said outside the House, they are frightened. They are a government that is frightened of itself. It does not like the parliamentary system. It has abused it and is making rules as it goes. This is very, very dangerous. At the same time, while this is going on, we and others condemn invasion of offices because that's breaking rules. But how can people obey rules if the leaders of the province don't obey rules?
Mr. Barrett, this is of vital importance to those interested in parliamentary democracy, and you'll bear with me if I recap just a little bit. Your whip had been informed by the government whip that Bill 3 would be called for debate yesterday.
That's correct.
On that information from your parliamentary whip, you took your Bill 3 documents and put them on your desk.
That is correct.
You then got a physical signal from Davidson, the Speaker.
To put the files away, Bill 3 would not be called.
He didn't actually shout you, it would not be called.
No, he just signaled, put them away, you know. I took it as a joke. I thought he was mocking. So I mockingly took my files, shoved them in the desk, and turned to Hanson. Hanson said, Dave, Bill 3 is going to be called. I then put them back on the desk. I got another hand signal from Davidson saying no, and then I got the note saying, trust me.
The note saying trust you came before he made his ruling.
That is correct.
The note came before he's made his ruling that if you were to speak, you would only have 40 minutes.
No, I wouldn't even have 40 minutes. I was shut off before I even started. It was obvious that the whole thing was orchestrated, Jack.
You were shut off before you got up to speak on the amendment to Bill 3.
As soon as I got up to speak, Schroeder interrupted on a point of order and asked for a ruling by the Speaker on whether or not the designated Speaker could be allowed to continue in unlimited time on an amendment. Davidson admitted There had been no previous ruling limiting a speaker. Of course there couldn't have been. None would have been warranted. Even when Bill Bennett ran around this province falsely accusing us in government of saying that we were limiting debate and not a dime without debate, there had never been, ever, anything like this before. And they had made up their mind ahead of time.
Now, let me get this straight. You're saying that Schroeder made a point of order that you should not be allowed to speak on that at all because you had spoken for 3 hours and 40 minutes in August.
That is correct.
And at that time, did the speaker, as he normally would do, take it under advisement and call an adjournment or
No.
refer to his books or...
No, I was very upset yesterday, Jack, and I still am angry. But I was very upset. I said, look, I said words to this effect. I said, if you're going to make this kind of ruling, then you must at least be courteous enough to the House members to take this under advisement. Normally, in a disputed matter, the Speaker would take a matter under advisement. There was no time. This was all orchestrated. It was chop, chop, chop. I was given a choice of being shot or being hanged.
Hold on, Dave Barrett, because I want to find out from you whether or not you are in fact banned from the House by precedent and behavior yesterday or not after the break. Dave Barrett has been explaining to us in considerable detail what happened in the House yesterday, including the fact that very strangely the Speaker, Walter Davidson, sent him a note. Trust me. Did he sign the note?
No, it's in his handwriting. He knows he sent it. What he sent it for was not to trust him in terms of the ruling. I had no idea the ruling. Trust him, as I interpreted, that I would not be speaking on Bill 3, and I assumed that meant that the government was not going to be calling Bill 3.
Do you trust him now as Speaker?
Well, he's finished as Speaker as far as I'm concerned. He has no credibility. Later on, I understand Pat McGeer brought in a motion of closure. Pat McGeer, that Liberal MLA who crossed the floor to join the much-hated Social Credit Party.
Politics in paradise.
Oh, yes, and he's the one, I understand last night, who brought in the closure motion, first time in 20 years. Jack, that's a side story, but you should be aware of it.
But just, Mr. Barrett, I'm interested as a reporter in further facts. You said very strongly, I will not leave this house or what to that
That is
effect.
correct.
What was your quote on that?
I said I will not leave this chamber. You may throw me out, but I will not leave this chamber. I was then told by one of the clerks that if I was physically ejected, I would be out for the whole session.
Were you physically ejected?
Yes, I was. I waited until a hand was put on my arm. The Speaker then called me to the chair and asked me if I had been warned. And I said, yes, I had. And then I stood my ground, and I did not move deliberately until they put hands on me.
Are you now banned from the House for the balance of the session?
To my knowledge, I do not think so. I have not heard yet. But that threat was made, and they may be changing the rules again. But I tell you this, Jack, as I sit here, I have never been as angry or as upset about a crass political decision by a government as this. And I meant it what I said yesterday. A little bit of Parliament has died in British Columbia, and they know it.
Are you suggesting now that the proper procedure, if they follow the tradition of the parliamentary rules, is that you will be banned from entering the House today?
If they believe in the rules, that's the proper procedure. But
If you are asked, will you say, as I'm asking you now, were you in fact physically ejected from the House yesterday?
I deliberately waited until a hand was put on me.
So therefore, if you are not banned from the House today, somebody is going to adjust their position to prevent major embarrassment to the Social Credit government.
Exactly. The whole thing has been a sham for the first moment. They had no right to do what they did yesterday. Jack, I don't care if you've got Social Credit listeners, Liberal or Tory or NDP. All of that is passing in history. Parliament is more important than party politics or any of us individuals. And when Parliament is attacked, we are all attacked in this province.
Tell me, The physical situation now is that the House is still sitting.
That is correct.
It's still sitting on yesterday's business or today's business?
Today's business on Bill 6, I understand.
Not Bill 3.
Not Bill 3. No.
Was Bill 3 withdrawn yesterday after
I don't think it was even completed yesterday.
Wasn't completed at all, you don't think, yesterday?
No.
All right. Who is behind this? You have accused Walter Davidson of collusion with the government. Have you or have you not?
No question about it. Absolutely. That is my opinion, and my opinion is that he is taking directions directly from Bill Bennett. Only a head of government could interfere at this level, and the Speaker has given in. Absolutely. That is my opinion.
Let me go back to not to dime without debate. I remember well in 74, I think it was, Bill Bennett was campaigning in the House and around the province when there was a suggestion that your government was going to restrict debate, perhaps even on the estimates, I can't remember, that he said not a dime without debate. At that time, did you in any way make precedents or change the rules of the House to accommodate Premier Bennett?
We had a House committee made up of Socreds, Liberals, and others recommending rules changes. They all agreed to them. The Socreds included to a 40-minute limit on debate and allowing a designated speaker as much time as he wanted. Then Bill Bennett attacked those rules changes as proposed, ran around the province saying not a dime without debate. We stated in the House that we would not make even those rule changes for that session, but that a designated speaker would be given the right to speak as long as they wanted on the budget speech, the throne speech, bills, and amendments to bills. Bill Bennett knew that. Bill Bennett was not telling the truth in that debate when he said not a dime without debate.
Can they now say that when you spoke in August in Bill 3 for 3 hours and 40 minutes, you exhausted your time as a designated speaker?
They cannot say that, Jack. It is clearly in the rules that the leader of the opposition or a designated speaker can speak. And I tell you, Jack, it was Bill Bennett who has brought Parliament down to its knees. No one else.
A designated speaker is a person named by the party to be the principal speaker on any bill.
The Premier, the leader of the opposition, or anyone they designate. That has been the rule, and it has never, ever been challenged. That was the rule when Bill Bennett went around this province saying not a dime without debate. Today, now, that slogan has validity, and it's under social credit.
The point you're making is that you have been denied your parliamentary freedom to speak because of an instant motion yesterday, and you alleged collusion against the Speaker with Bill Bennett behind it, directing the scenes to deny you freedom of speech, as a result of which you have been ejected from the House and may not, if you say you were ejected, you may not be back at all this session.
I don't know what the further ruling will be, but the summation is correct. There was no previous ruling. Yesterday's ruling was the first of its kind ever. It was made in absolute haste. There was no time taken. It was fixed, arranged, and it involved collusion, in my opinion, and it has shamed all British Columbians.
Stay there for a moment, Dave Barrett. I want to make sure I've asked you all the possible questions on this highly crucial issue after the break. Let me put on another hat, Mr. Barrett, and ask you if the public is not sick and tired of the prospect of an endless filibuster of the dirty dozen, and they can see this going on until February or March of next year, and that Bennett has decided, perhaps doing some secret polls, that now's the time to roll it through with a steamroller for the public good.
Jack, the public good is in the continuance of Parliament. Debates come, debates go. The province has been worked up over issues in the past, as of the land bill, for example, and these bills now. That comes and goes. What is more important is the system that allows freedom of speech, freedom of representation, and consistency in the rules of the House. When that begins to break down for any expediency, such as ramming bills through, then Parliament suffers. Parliament is more important than the NDP. Parliament is more important than social credit. Parliament is more important than any of our careers, illustrious or otherwise. After 23 years, I've learned one thing. We own the most precious system of government anywhere on the face of this earth. And people must not be allowed to abuse it. And that is what is taking place now.
Mr. Bennett has got his 27-bill package.
That's correct.
You've passed through a few like the Tobacco Amendment Tax
That's
Act
correct.
and a couple of other things for which you've been criticized by QB and the BC Fed for not filibustering every single bill.
That is irrelevant. We have our duty to perform.
But it is your plan and policy, is it not, to talk these bills to death if you can, if it took you 2 years?
Jack, before these rules existed, we were allowed under W.A.C. Bennett to talk until the moon was blue.
Right.
Social credit delayed the House when we were in government till the moon was blue. Delay has always been part and parcel of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. And when it came to delay and stalling and using tactics, social credit was the best I've ever seen. But they were never closed by us. Never. Because the rules, to me, Jack, are more important than my party, more important than any political maneuvering. The system must survive. That is why I condemn office takeovers. That is why I condemn illegal acts. But, Jack, we have had an illegal act on the rules of the House, in my opinion, by social credit. It is a government that is amoral, in my opinion.
Is there any way in which you or your party, especially if you're not in the House this afternoon, can attempt to call the Speaker to
Yes.
to order?
As soon as the House adjourns, for any reason whatsoever, it is Frank Howard's intention to bring in a substantive motion against the Speaker, and that will have to be debated. Now, the government may put it aside and not call it, but if a government did that and not call the substantive motion against the Speaker, which is very, very rare, then we're dealing with a government that has frankly lost all sense of responsibility.
Might you ask the Lieutenant Governor to step in and look at the situation?
There's nothing he can do, Jack. This is a matter for all citizens of British Columbia to understand and become informed on. Most of us are not educated in the ways of parliamentary democracy.
I just can't get away from perhaps a public perception which doesn't appreciate the nuances of what you're telling this morning. I think I understand your position clearly.
Well,
that they have upset the rules on a designated speaker and that a ruling was thrown at you very quickly and a note from the speaker which said, trust me. Did you ask him what that meant?
well, I assume it meant that he knew that I wouldn't be speaking on Bill 3. That's my assumption, and that was the context in which the note was passed. But
Is
look,
this
Jack,
the start of a social credit steamroller to apply closure to the bills, perhaps before the BCGEU contract expires on October 31st?
I have no idea. But I want to remind you, Jack, and of a little thing you just said that's important. Perhaps most British Columbians don't appreciate what has taken place. Separate all the politics. What has taken place is that the government, social credit, Bill Bennett, have decided to take unto themselves all the rules of Parliament and interpret them the way they want for their purposes.
With a designated speaker and 40 minutes for every other member of the opposition, though, would the business of the country and the present financial crisis not be slowed to an extent where it would create more joblessness and misery among the ordinary people?
No, let us deal with some facts. Eventually, the time would run out, those bills would go through. Secondly, Jack, I want to remind every citizen in this province, we went 8 months without a session. We went past the legal time for a government to spend money in March of this year. There is over a year's work to be done. The Socreds did not call the House. We have only been here about 55 days. If it ended now, it would be one of the shortest sessions in the last 10 years. So let us get that straight. It's not as if an unusual amount of time has gone by.
2 questions. Chabot says quite clearly, the more the delay by the NDP, the more the firings.
Well, let's deal with that. The bill hasn't been called for a month. It was adjourned on August the 16th by the government and not called for a month. We were told there were going to be regulations released 5 weeks ago. Jack, that is an outright lie. Let's deal with facts. The facts are that the government has filibustered its own legislation.
Now, final question. Are you, David Barrett, going to present yourself at the door of the House this day to see whether or not, as a physically ejected member, you are banned from the rest of the session, or if somebody is going to do the Nelson touch and close an eye? And what will you do if somebody says, okay, you weren't ejected physically, you left in your warning, please take your seat?
I received that threat first through the clerk and then acknowledged by the Speaker. To this point, I don't know what is going to happen next because I have not yet officially been contacted by the Speaker.
We shall watch the developments with considerable interest. My thanks to Dave Barrett, leader of the NDP, presently ejected and perhaps permanently barred from the House for this session, who claims that he has been brutally and in collusion denied the rights established by the parliamentary procedures in British Columbia. I just wish I could get the Premier on this morning to respond to it.
I doubt if he will.
I will, however, have Politics in Paradise McGear after the break.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Paddy McGear, of course, is the tenured professor at UBC, as the Minister of University Science, Technologies, this, that, and whatnot. And you introduced last night a motion of closure, which Mr. Barrett says is the first time it's been done in that House in 20 years. What the devil's going on, Dr. McGear?
Well, last night we were debating a motion that the House adjourn until 8:30 p.m. At 8:45. It reminded me of a similar debate some years ago when the House adjourned from 11 o'clock to 11:05, and 11:30, when they were still debating that motion, my good friend Gordon Gibson said, pardon me, Mr. Speaker, are we debating whether we should adjourn to 11:05 p.m. next or 11:05 p.m. last? So that if you're debating at 9 o'clock whether or not you should adjourn until 8:30, I think whether it's the legislature of British Columbia or any other group having a meeting, that debate is clearly ridiculous.
In other words, you brought in a simple closure motion which ended the session. Well, why then did you sit all night? Because you went into a separate session?
Oh, no, it was a
Separate sitting?
No, it was a continuation of the afternoon session. As a matter of fact, that one just ended an hour ago. It's 25 to 10, so the House will be sitting again at 10 a.m. this morning.
10 a.m. this morning. Now,
Yeah.
you had Mr. Barrett, I'm sure you were in the studio and you saw what he said and you heard what he said. He says it was a deliberate plan with collusion between the Premier and the Speaker and Harvey Schroeder to deny him his right as a designated Speaker, which is a very serious charge indeed. And you heard the bit about the little note from Walter Davidson. Trust me, it does look, does it not, like a deliberate attempt to prevent Barrett from speaking as the designated Speaker on Bill 3.
No, not really, Jack. As you know, there are several stages of a bill, and people are free to talk at length on each one of those stages. Mr. Barrett could have been the designated Speaker for as long as he wished to speak during second reading. There was an amendment which really said, let's get rid of that bill, and there is no designated Speaker, as the ruling was made yesterday for an amendment of that kind.
Mr. Barrett said no such ruling has ever been made before and that this is a brand new precedent.
Well, that's because nobody has spoken ever before at such length about hoisting a bill. That's a traditional gesture made by an opposition if they're especially displeased with a given bill. But of course, at this particular session, there are any number of bills for which a hoist motion is being put forward. As a matter of fact, we've just finished debating for 12 hours a hoist motion on a relatively minor bill. So I think you can understand that if this comes for every single bill of the government's program, then we're going to have a lot of all-night sittings.
Not a dime without debate, I believe, is a phrase which your Premier used in much similar circumstances, perhaps?
Sure, and there's lots of opportunity for the opposition to debate. A person, for example, can get up and speak as often as they like on every single section
40
of
minutes?
every bill.
40
Well, no, they, during committee of the whole, you can get up again and again and again. They can get up 10 times on a given section, so that there's plenty of opportunity for all opposition members to debate. If they can't debate one stage of a bill, they can debate another stage. And in committee, they can debate every single section, and they can debate it for as many times as they like.
No, you make it sound like Davy Barrett was off his head. Is that right? Making
no,
an absolute mountain out of a molehill, accusing the Speaker of collusion, accusing Bill Bennett of engineering, accusing Harvey Schrader of setting it up, and you say, oh, it's a mere bagatelle, it doesn't matter.
Well, look, the leader of the opposition was upset. I've been in opposition, and I've been upset before, and I understand that. But the way Parliament works is that the opposition has its say, and then eventually the government must have its way. Look, in a democracy, you're not elected to obstruct. You're elected to oppose. You're elected to debate, but you're not elected to occupy. And certainly in opposition, you're not elected to govern. So there'd be plenty of opportunity for all of the opposition people to present their opposition to every single bill and to every single stage of every bill.
Sounds very reasonable, but doesn't seem quite right.
Well,
When will all debate be cut off? When will all debate be cut off?
The rule is that the legislature lasts as long as the opposition wants it to last. And they'll have plenty of opportunity to speak. Again, this particular bill that Mr. Barrett was so upset about, he can speak on every single section of that bill, and he can speak on every section as often as he wishes. Then he can speak again on third reading, and they can have further amendment motions on third reading. All of these things are possible, and Mr. Barrett is going to have many more opportunities to speak at length on this particular bill.
He might not have any opportunities at all, because he tells me he was physically ejected yesterday, and you know as well as I do that when you're physically ejected, you're banned from the House for the session.
Oh, look, nobody's going to ban the leader of the opposition from the House, and he's not going to engage in any fisticuffs with anybody. He will have plenty of opportunity to express his ideas again and again and again in the legislature and outside of the legislature. That's what democracy is all about.
Tell me,
But Jack, everybody knows, and I've spent almost as many years in opposition as Dave Barrett, everybody knows the opposition cannot run the province. That's not the intention. You run the province when you're elected to government. And governments can be very, very patient, but ultimately the government's program must pass, or else you have anarchy. We can't have people who occupy cabinet offices. We can't have an opposition running the government. The government has to do that, and if the people are dissatisfied with how the government runs their affairs, they replace them at the next election. But you can never have the opposition or minorities running a government. That's anarchy.
What do your polls tell you about the public's approval for the use of closure, which you will obviously be required to do between now and Christmas?
I don't think closure will be required, Jack. I think people should have their opportunity to have their say. Maybe not exactly when they want to have their say, but they'll certainly have plenty of opportunity for that. For example, the government will call bills in whatever order seems best for the government, but the opposition people should be prepared, as we were when I was in opposition, to debate any bill or any section of any bill at any time. They will have an opportunity. It may not be just when they want it, but it will be there.
You certainly have messed about with this legislative program, putting bills in, pulling them out, because largely you're still planning to amend some of the dirty dozen, I veritably believe.
Well, bills used to be passed when I was in opposition in a matter of 2 or 3 days. And if you go with a simple amendment motion to hoist a bill like we did for 12 hours last night, then of course it does seem erratic, because you never know how long the opposition is going to talk on any given bill at any time.
Not a dime without debate.
But eventually, as everyone knows, it's got to come to a vote.
Okay, so Patrick McGeer says absolute nothing to it whatsoever. No threat to freedom of speech at all. Davy Barrett has flipped his lid. There was no collusion, although that funny little note about trust me. And there was no master plan by Bill Bennett to take advantage of the inimical antipathy to occupation of the Premier's office, that you'll just carry on with suavity, nonchalance, élan and aplomb, and apply closure when you decide it's time.
Jack, this is the normal parliamentary process. There won't be closure, but people will have to eventually face a vote, and they can talk as long as they like before that. They may have to talk all night, but still in all, they'll have an opportunity to say what they have to say. But what you can't have, and I think you understand this, and all the listeners understand it, you can't have the opposition governing the province. That's not their role. Their role is to oppose, but only by debate, not by obstruction, not by occupation.
Oh, come now, you know that obstruction by filibuster is a time-honored and much respected parliamentary tactic.
Sure.
Whenever, I mean, a truly loyal subject of the chief magistrate can't possibly submit to arbitrary measures.
No, that's quite true. And so they can debate. It may have to be all night. And the government's response, when things finally must be resolved, because the government is there to govern, then you debate all night.
That's enough. You're not bright enough to keep on any longer this morning, Dr. McGee. You're so banal and bland that we'll talk some other time about your high-tech propositions, but not today. Anyway, will you move a motion that Barrett be allowed back into the House this afternoon?
Oh, he'll be allowed back into the House. Look, there's going to be no difficulty about that. Mr. Barrett is angry, but like all opposition members,
well, you know,
he'll
you've been on all sides of the fence.
Sure.
Good. My thanks to Pat McGee. Webster after the break. Thanks, Pat. And don't forget, not a dime without debate. Clem Chappell, as you know, is our man in Victoria. Clem, did you hear Barrett on the program this morning?
Yes, I did.
Did you hear Politics in Paradise McGee on the program this morning?
Yes, sir.
It seems like he's back in paradise again, doesn't it?
Well, he's never less than confident, but I would say he's quite cocky when they're in some kind of trouble, I would think.
What do you think of it all yourself now? I'll tell you what I think. I think that the allegations made by Barrett in the outside the legislature and on this program are extremely serious.
Well, I think they are. If he says they're going to challenge the Speaker in the House, and if he really believes and thinks that the Speaker did collude with the government in order to stifle his debate, then it's an extremely serious charge.
And the matter which is going to be subject, of course, if they bring in a resolution this afternoon, say by Frank Howard, the government doesn't have to call that resolution for debate, does it?
It doesn't have to, but you know, the government operates the House very much on its own will. It can set the agenda, as you know, and nothing happens by accident. Nothing important happens by accident. There's one little tidbit. The Barrett people are putting out the story that they observed just before the occurrence yesterday afternoon, Barrett being thrown out, observed Bennett, Schroeder, and Barrett together in the Speaker's dining room talking. Now, the conversation was not apparently overheard, but the pace at which things happen, Schroeder getting up and challenging, the note from Davidson to Barrett, and suddenly Davidson knows exactly what he's talking about and pushes through with tremendous sort of force of will to get Barrett thrown out.
Well, that was a funny thing, you know, trust me, sending a note, trust me, before he made the ruling. On the face of it, I would say that Barrett may well be right, because he was the designated Speaker. I gather that McGee's defense is on the fact that it was only a motion to hoist, and as such, there couldn't be a designated Speaker.
Well, it's just not clear. It says in the standing orders that on public bills, leaders of recognized parties or designated members have no limit. And that is the way the rule reads there on the face of it. And Barrett is the one, his government brought in this rule to allow unlimited debate. So, you know, that's his belief that that was the spirit of the bill.
There's no exception saying that on an amendment motion that speakers are restricted to that leaders or designated speakers are restricted.
I have to plead some ignorance in the way the thing was interpreted. It gets very confused, and they quote Beauchesne and everyone else. But there's no question that the original intent of the bill, according to Barrett, whose government brought it in, or who was in government when it was brought in, the intent was unlimited speaking.
All right, question now on the general atmosphere in the House. Has it got to that fiery, bitter, nasty stage when WAC used to rule the legislature by exhaustion?
It didn't flare up last night. For some reason, it didn't flare up. I think probably a lot of emotional energy was let off earlier in the day when Barrett was ejected. So things went quietly overnight. But I would now expect that things would heat up especially if this very serious charge is brought against the Speaker by Frank Howard, the House Leader.
And how do you expect this to end up? How long will it be before we're out of this battle, or does this mean extended filibusters or extended debate and the eventual application of closure?
It depends on how I think the parties believe the public is perceiving the fight to go. If the NDP thinks it's fighting a losing battle before the public, it's really the public that everybody's watching. I'm sure the Socreds went ahead on this because their polls are telling them they're out front. It'll be the public that decides, without even knowing it perhaps, whether or not the NDP will press on and filibuster as much as they can, and they still have a lot of time to go.
Will you let me, one of your large staff, let me know at 10 o'clock if Barrett gets denied entrance or is allowed into the House, because that's key.
Certainly will.
Thank you again for your perspicacity, assistance, help, cooperation, wit, and wisdom. Climb Chapel.
Anytime.
Okay, Webster's going to go to the phones just to see what the public thinks of it and to see if I know what I think of it after the break. You can say it's all hot air if you like, but one thing that people must do is keep an eye on the operation of the legislature. Because under the parliamentary system, the British parliamentary system, we don't have the checks and balances of our American friends to the south. We don't have the reasoned balance you get in the House of Commons in London, where this very seldom erupts because plans are made by the government and the opposition well in advance what the timing will be on the government's legislation. And that's generally kept to. But here, of course, and not a dime without a debate, our designated speaking from now till Christmas time has been established here because of the fears of the possible arrogant behavior of any government, whether it's Social Credit or NDP, and that's the only kind we have in British Columbia. So just to kind of cool myself off, you've had both sides of the story, the allegations against the Speaker, and you've had the very calm defense of Pat McGeer, and I'm a reporter. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Yes, it's first of all, I'd start off by saying that I was one of the individuals that spent the night in the Premier's office several days ago. And
well, that puts you on my black books right away. That was stupid.
Okay, well, well, let me say at the outset, then I'm not calling to debate that question.
Right.
I'm calling to say that this recent incident with Mr. Barrett seems indicative at this point of the Social Credit Party's interpretation, if you will, of democracy, the way they see it. And I mean by that they seem to have an idea that you break the electorate out of a broom closet once every 4 years. If you're successful in garnering enough ballots or votes, you're then entitled to perform in any way you wish for the next 4 years, with only another election to forestall.
Fair enough. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Webster, I'm thoroughly disgusted as to what went on yesterday. You know, we run our union meetings under parliamentary rules of order, and I can guarantee you that if we tried what was done yesterday on a contentious issue, we would hear you and every other hotline host screaming from here to Hope and back about how terrible it is. It's beyond words, you know. Whether or not they're delaying the House is irrelevant.
Agreed.
It is a matter of keeping to the rules. It's the same for the Socreds or the NDP, depending on who is in government and who's in opposition. And the fact that they are pulling this sort of stuff is terrible, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
We couldn't have a word with Dave there. What I don't understand is you get a government elected by the people, okay? Now, they sit in the House and there's a debate going on. This happens with Dave Barrett. Now, you're asking for public opinion. And I think the public's going to be outraged at this.
On which side? Against Barrett or for Bennett?
Against the Social Credit. They're trying to run a dictatorial government. You know, they're just getting way out of hand. And if Bennett lasts 4 years, he's damn lucky.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes.
Before the May 5th election, we heard nothing from this government whatsoever. They get elected, and all of a sudden they shut this down, they shut that down. We're laying off 3,000 people, and I think it's all a bunch of bull. They're going to talk in a while in the legislature, and then they're going to go, we'll compromise, we'll only lay off 1,500, and that'll be the end of it.
I agree with you that the Republic of British Columbia was not prepared for the draconian, that means somewhat horrifying in many ways, packages thrown into the legislature, because most sane people realized something had to be done. But Bennett sat for 7.5 months and 7 years before that, watching the octopus grow, not doing a thing. Wham, bam, 27 packages.
Why did he say all of this on his election trail? Before, he didn't say a word.
Well, he did. He got the mandate for restraint. He got the mandate for the wage freeze. But even an old-timer like myself, when I came back, I still don't understand all the legislation.
Right.
Damn difficult. And if Bennett were to come out and say, okay, this is a package, this is a democracy, I'm going to allow, whether or not they agreed with him, 3 weeks for debating this, a week for debating that, and apply closure, like it or lump it, people could make their choice.
Where are the news media, though, when all of this is coming out before the election? The news media didn't attack him at all. They just, followed the campaign trail, had the party, and then the election's over, and,
The news media is remarkably unopinionated in British Columbia. Many social
the
creditors...
NDP was in power.
Many social creditors will tell you that the media is entirely infiltrated by NDPers. They'll tell you that. And many NDPers will say that people like myself are the voice of the...
NDP or a social credit or
voice
anything.
of the capitalist bosses. No, don't blame the messenger.
Well, they're the watchdog, are they not?
Supposed to be. We do our best. Here we go again. I don't know.
Yeah,
no. Fort Nelson, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, a question for you. If they can move the delegated speaker there out so quickly as they did with Barrett yesterday for the rest of the session, and the NDP put up another delegated speaker, could they remove him on the same grounds?
If they get away with this, what I'm told is a brand new precedent appointed yesterday. Now get the precedent. The designated speaker is the leader of the government or the opposition or a person designated, and his debate is unlimited. Now, Barrett says that the designated speaker applies on every business of the House. Yesterday, somebody called the speaker on a point that on an amendment there should be no designated speaker, and therefore he couldn't speak for unlimited time. That's the point. Now, the clerk of the House and the speaker, whom I cannot get on the air, although Mr. Schroeder would like to break parliamentary precedents and come on the air, Mr. Davidson, Walter, is it Davidson Delta? Oh, the guy who thinks the GBRD is riddled with communists and socialists. That's him. Nice little, well-dressed Walter Davidson. Davidson wants to come on. We'll cancel programs to get him on, I'll tell you. Or the Premier, because you're going to have to come to a resolve on this issue one way or another.
Yeah, but if they...
Unless we think that Davy Barrett's flipped his lid, and I don't think he has. But although his intention is to delay and debate as long as he can. Although you can see Barrett was quite honest this morning. He said, in effect, to me, we're not doing what Solidarity tells us. We'll fight the dirty dozen, the other ones we've let through. Solidarity, of course, could be a bit of a crocodile in Barrett's back, no matter how he behaves. Parksville.
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to get on when McGear was on this morning.
He put me to sleep. I didn't know what to do with him.
Well, I'll tell you. I would like to know first, just a couple of little short comments, how he could expect anybody to believe him after the deal they pulled off in the Dirty Tricks affair where he made lying and forgery illegal.
I'm sorry, I'm not going back to that kind of thing. I have a guest sitting in the office here. Got to give him some time, haven't I? I'll decide after the break. I tend to become a bit of a nag at times, but when the leader of the opposition, who ain't no fool, accuses the Speaker and the member and the Premier of some form of collusion to deny him freedom of speech, you can't ignore it. And don't forget now. Now, where am I going? Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
I would have to agree with Mr. Dave Barrett's interpretation of the parliamentary procedure, and after seeing and hearing both sides of the argument, I found that Mr. Pat McGeer, Dr. Pat McGeer, was kind of arrogant and kind of he more or less was holding all the cards, so he didn't have to worry about it. Even though I've never seen Mr. Barrett as angry as I've seen him this morning.
No, neither have I. Neither have I.
I think that he does have a right to be angry because of it's the whole basis of the parliamentary debate system.
I think for those few of us who may be interested that what must come now is a clear answer to the serious public charges made by the leader of the opposition, who, as he says, is leaving public life. By May of next year, he will certainly be out of public life. He's made that perfectly clear. And Barrett, you know, emotional though he may be, is not a guy to create a straw man for the sake of his own vanity. I do not think so, no matter what you think of Barrett. He's not a man of overweening vanity, I'll tell you that. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'd like to know just what the next procedure is. I would like to know on the rulings of the council that they throw out the parliamentary rules with such an arrogant attitude. Should we start an investigation? Is there some way? Who actually investigates Parliament? Is that our own?
Only Parliament can investigate Parliament. Frank Howard, the whip of the House Leader of the NDP, is going to make a motion in the House this afternoon, perhaps a motion, Webster's speculation, of non-confidence in the Speaker because of his sudden interpretation of a precedent not before applied, as I understand what Barrett said to me this morning. Whether the government will call that, and I think they should, and debate it or not, I do not know. But when the...
We'll never get to the actual courts, or maybe
No.
the federal courts or something?
One of my reporters asked me that this morning, and I said, and I think with rectitude, that the actions of Parliament in conducting its own business cannot be challenged by the courts, but only by the people at election time. That's my feeling, and I think I'm right.
Well, I'd just like to express my support then for Mr. Barrett, and I wish him best of luck.
Thank you. Nanaimo, go ahead, please. I'm waiting to hear if Davey's in the house or not.
Good morning, Jack.
Yes.
Have your program on and usually watch you. And agree with the former speaker. I am a union member myself. I've studied parliamentary rules before. The amendment that he refers to there, any debate upon it can be as long as that person wants to speak, who is speaking at the time.
Well, we have rules. We have rules in the House whereby a designated speaker can go on forever and the others have a maximum of 40 minutes. But as McGeer pointed out, of course, you can speak endlessly on every section of the bill, but it's much more difficult to do that. However, it would appear that Social Credit has got some questions to answer, especially this note, "Trust me," which Barrett tells me he got from the Speaker and which he tore up, but apparently he's got it back and stuck it together again, and he says it's in Davidson's writing. Why would Davidson do that? What does that mean? Strange, isn't it?
One more comment too, Jack.
Yeah.
I would like to advise you that I happen to be a pulp worker, and the pulp and paper workers have taken a vote. The CPU has taken a vote. Jack Monroe is in the process of taking a vote, and they are very much afraid that we'll have a strike vote in our hands. Nanaimo area voted 92% in the IWA. They're very much afraid that we'll have a strike, and they're doing the best they can to push that labor legislation through before we ever can strike.
Oh, surely not. God, you don't need a strike. The IWA doesn't need a strike. God, there are so many unemployed now, a strike's the last thing we need.
But the things that they have turned around and done to the agenda that is proposed, ask for a copy of their agenda, Jack, and you'll just find out how far they're going.
There's no agenda for me to get, and I haven't got the amendments to the Labour Code. Go ahead from Victoria.
Yes, Jack. Good morning. I am ashamed to admit that I voted for the Social Credit Party. You know, the biggest blunder I could have made. I don't want to discuss the bills or what happened yesterday, but the downright arrogance of Bill Bennett, people like Brian Smith, how dare they look down their noses at us as the people they are supposed to be representing. You know, the way they talk and the way that they come over the air and in the papers, it's as if we are third-class citizens. They're totally remote, and they're just a bunch of snobs, and Bill Bennett better watch his image. I'm just livid. I'm going to go off now and listen to you.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Yes, with respect to the designated speaker speaking to the amendment, so unlimited time, he can speak as long as he wishes to an amendment to the original motion. Because if he could not, the government could amend their own motion and have closure on that amendment, thereby closing off the original motion.
Yeah,
Very simple.
That's a good point. Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, when you're being held up by a bunch of highwaymen, you gotta turn the thing around and treat the thing in kind. The last time, this isn't the first time that Dave Barrett got thrown out of the legislature. It won't be the last. The last time it was because he used unparliamentary language in his protest of the BC Hydro Commission's borrowing habits on the foreign money market. And shortly after, a few days after he got thrown out of the House for that, the BC Hydro Dunsmuir, Chekai Dunsmuir substation went up in smoke. So all British Columbia is lost out with them kind of tactics.
That's mixing apples and oranges, I do believe. Got to stop smoking. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster? Jack?
Yes, yes.
Yes, it's very obvious that Mr. Bennett has no respect for Parliament. As a matter of fact, I think he finds it far too cumbersome. We didn't have a legislative session for 8 months.
Yeah, that was a shame. That was dreadful.
Thing is, you know, and I believe, really and truly, that bringing in 27 bills like that to throw everybody in disarray instead of a regulatory order of bills and a little bit of civility in the House, you know, this is really sick. And I wonder, when I read about Mackenzie King, you know, and how long he operated, and I look at Mr. Bennett, who will not intelligently and lucidly come without a prepared speech from Mr. Heal's office, just what the score is and how well he is. And yes.
Don't let's have anything snarky like that. I have made a request to have Premier Bennett appear on the program as soon as he wishes, and I'm looking forward to as much as you are, I am sure. I'll let you know if Davy Barrett goes back into the House next. Japanese cars or Canadian jobs. Bob Attrell is the president of the Canadian Association of Japanese Auto Dealers. No. Jump, Bob, would you please jump? But the federal government task force report by the Canadian government wants 60% Canadian content on all popular makes of imported cars sold in Canada. So first of all, let me ask you a simple question. How much of the Canadian market do you people own?
Right now, we're in the 15 to 20% range, Jack.
Is that all?
That's all.
15 to 20%?
Yeah.
I understand your imports in 1982 were 153,000 cars.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's only 15 to 20%?
No, our percentage has dropped slightly this year because the American domestic percentage has gone up drastically in the last few months. Their sales have increased drastically, and that's one of the reasons that we've been petitioning the government to remove these arbitrary protectionist measures that are costing all Canadians more money.
What? Tell me about these arbitrary protectionist measures. You mean the time when Ed Lumley told the bureaucrats only to do 1 car a day when they were all stacked up out here?
That was the start of it.
On the marshalling yard?
That was the start of it, Jack. And the government, however well-intentioned, said at that time that they were restricting Japanese cars to protect Canadian jobs, with the idea that if a customer couldn't buy a Japanese car, he would then buy a Canadian car, a small car. But the fact is that the big percentage of those small American cars are built in the United States. So what we were doing, in effect, was exporting jobs to the United States while costing jobs in the very vital import industry, especially here in BC.
I just don't quite get that. You're saying that if we don't buy Japanese car and we buy small American imports, that what we're doing is bringing in small American imports which don't give any jobs to Canadians at all.
Exactly.
Whereas if we buy unlimited Japanese car, at least we'll employ salesmen and mechanics and maintenance
and
men.
dock workers and rail workers and transportation workers. We're putting those people out of work. We're still putting them out of work by these restrictions.
So you've come out here to tell me that for a phony protection of auto workers in the East, we in the West have to pay more for cars.
Not only that, Jack, the risk is very real of retaliation from Japan, and it's going to hurt BC and the prairies a hell of a lot worse than it's going to hurt the East. Premier Willie Davis, I'm ashamed to say, from Ontario, doesn't seem to give a darn about jobs out here and about trade with Japan, because he has the most dismal record across the country.
Now, once again, though, what about the tool content of Canadian cars? What is the content of Japanese cars which is manufactured or put into the cars in Canada? You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, added value.
Added value.
Yeah. Right now, it's probably running in the 10 to 15% range. That would vary from make to make.
Now, do you manufacture or assemble any Japanese cars in Canada?
No, there's no Japanese cars manufactured or assembled in Canada at this time.
Wasn't there a plan to put a plant somewhere out here on the West Coast?
There is a plan for Toyota to build a parts manufacturing facility here in BC, and that is fact. That's underway.
That was magnesium wheels or something, was it not?
That's right. Aluminum wheels to be shipped back to Japan, put on the cars, and then shipped worldwide to get more Canadian content.
And that is going to happen. There's no doubt about it at all.
That's for sure.
Now, when you talk about Japanese retaliation, is this a threat that comes from the Japanese government?
Yes. The Japanese ambassador to Canada has been quoted several times in the past couple of months as saying that there is a very, very real threat of Japanese retaliation if these unfair protectionist policies are pursued by the Canadian government. Can I give you a statistic on that, Jack?
Please do.
Okay. We traditionally in Canada are 10% of the American automobile market.
Correct.
Just about bang on. In the United States right now, they are limited to 1.68 million cars. So therefore, it follows we should have 168,000 cars in Canada. We are limited to 153,000 cars for this year. We have a trade surplus with Japan of $1.6 billion. The United States has a trade deficit with Japan of $20 billion. Now, is that fair?
Good point. In other words, the balance of trade in Canada's favor through lumber, coal, whatever, is 1.6 billion.
Exactly.
We have a credit balance of 1.6 billion.
Right.
We make that much profit, you might say, broadly speaking, on trading with Japan.
That's right.
Well, why are we doing the tail of the American dog by agreeing to these restrictions?
To appease the unions and the big three who are controlled from Detroit. And that's what I'm here to tell the public about and to bring our story to them. Because we're risking jobs in BC and all of Canada, but especially BC and the prairie provinces. And that's why we're out here to talk to the dealers, the public, the government, and to raise support for our cause in Ottawa.
All right. If you got up to up to your 10%, you know, the automatic figure of, say, 168,000 cars.
Right.
Don't tell me you'd cut any prices. The retail price of a Japanese small car in Canada, would it be affected favorably or not?
Yes, it would, but not by price cutting. Our market is supply and demand. When the supply is tight, you're going to pay top dollar. There's no deals to be made now. You go into a Japanese car dealership and you pay full price because we don't have enough cars. We have to charge all the money to keep our places profitable and keep our employees employed. But when there's more cars available, then there's more wheeling and dealing and more competition among dealers, and therefore the market operates to reduce the price.
Now, what kind of revenue would you have, extra revenue, if you got your proper 10% quota?
Me personally? As
No.
I'm sorry.
The retail Japanese car industry in Canada. I've got a figure here the increase in revenue to domestic car makers will be $216 million. Now, would you do $216 million worth more business to spread among employees in Canada? Does that sound right?
I would think that that's that's a figure out of the air somewhere. I don't know how it's backed up statistically, but yes, there certainly would be increased revenue for our dealers, but there would be an increased employment, Jack. We've laid off up to 5,000 employees over the last 12 to 18 months because of these restrictions. And nowhere can the government, the Big Three, or the UAW point to re-employment in the domestic industry to justify it.
You're saying quite bluntly, on a free trade basis, certainly up to a proper quota, you could re-employ these 5,000 people. No Canadians would lose jobs because the cars are coming in from the States anyway. Well, it's just self-service protectionism from the Big Three auto dealers, from Lumley, who's an Eastern Canadian cabinet minister, and from the auto unions. Is that right?
That's it. That capsulizes it.
How come you sell cars? Why can't the Americans or the Canadians make... I'm sure they can make cars as good as yours.
They can. They can, Jack. We have every confidence in the North American auto worker. The auto worker is not to blame. It's the unions and the confrontation between unions and management, the right to fight. That's what the unions are fighting for now. Instead of getting their members on the boards and getting agreement and discussion with management, they want to fight. That's the same old traditional story that's been hampering us all along. Can I tell you a little story on that subject?
Very short.
Okay. After the Second World War, MacArthur was in Japan to get things going. He went into a plant and he said, "You need a union here. I'll be back in 6 months." He came back 6 months later and they said, "We've got a union. Here's the workers, here's the foreman, here's the plant manager, here's the president, here's the treasurer." He says, "You dummies, you're supposed to have all the workers over there and the management here, and you control them that way." And they said, "Well, we thought that a union was to have everybody working together for the betterment of the whole factory," and they've been doing that ever since, Jack.
Mind you, if you think that we're going to go for Japanese style of paternalistic employment, you've got another thing coming.
We're not suggesting that for a minute.
You know, the Japanese are goodies now. I know they're goodies. I'm sure they're goodies. But I don't think I want to live Japanese style. Now, I think the last question. What was my last question? Anyway, has Mulroney promised to help you when he's Prime Minister?
No, he hasn't as yet. He's been on record before he became the leader of the opposition as supporting our cause, but we just recently wrote him and asked him to reaffirm that, and he hasn't seen fit to do that just as yet.
Listen, you've been on another morning I would have taken you for longer. You're a breath of fresh air. At least you say words of one syllable which make it quite clear that you think the Liberal government and the Minister Lumley are round the bend. Or words to that effect.
Well, that's well put, Jack.
My thanks to Robert B. Attrell, President, Canadian Association of Japanese Auto Dealers. Now I'll be back, I believe, with a clip from Premier Bennett. Am I correct? Somebody nod ahead. After the break. Dave Barrett, sitting in his office in Victoria, and tells us that he will not be going into the House until he gets a ruling on his particular status as to whether or not he was physically ejected, which might bar him from the balance of the entire session. Just shortly after 10 o'clock, however, Premier Bennett emerged from the caucus meeting, and he was tackled in the usual scrum in Victoria by Clem Chappell and our cameraman, and here's what happened, I think, now.
Premier, the NDP has put out that you and the Speaker and Mr. Schroeder colluded to cause the interpretation of the rules which had Mr. Barrett ejected from the House, resulted in Mr. Barrett being...
Well, that's an outright lie.
That you were having lunch in the dining room with Mr. Schroeder and Mr. Davis.
No, I met Mr. Schroeder about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon to discuss a night sitting. That's well after the fact. The New Democratic Party member in the dining room was Mr. Howard, who must remember the time. I did not meet with Speaker Davidson at all. Therefore, what they're saying is no right lie.
Did Mr. Schrader approach Mr. Davidson prior to yesterday?
No, I don't think so. You'd have to ask him that. But in the political tactics and the politics that are being played, that statement, which was just reported to me, is an outright lie by the NDP.
You had no knowledge that Mr. Davidson was not going to allow Mr. Barrett to speak yesterday?
I do not consult with the Speaker, nor does he send me notes.
You had no knowledge? You had no knowledge that he wasn't going to allow Mr. Barrett to speak?
I have no knowledge.
The plot thickens. Twice Mr. Premier Bennett said, when challenged about the collusion between himself and the Speaker, it's an outright lie. It's an outright lie. He doesn't consult with the Speaker, and as you noticed, he slipped in a little jab there. The Speaker doesn't send him notes. We now have, whether you like to face it or not, a major political confrontation which could further raise the climate at a time when nobody needs the climate to be heated up in British Columbia. When the dirty dozen of the bills, some of which are not yet finally amended, have been brought into the House, pulled out again, brought into the House, pulled out again, and I'm afraid I make no apologies whatsoever for the extensive coverage I've given to this breaking story this morning. Mr. Barrett's entitled to his full freedom of speech, and so is Mr. Bennett. Pat McGeer gave a very quiet, reasoned, push-it-away response, saying that, in effect, that Barrett was making a mountain out of a molehill. Barrett's point is quite clear, that the rules long established in the House, which made him a designated Speaker yesterday, were arbitrarily, and he alleges by collusion, were used in some way to prevent him from speaking extemporaneously for as long as he so wished. I don't know, go away or not. I just know the whole matter is very unseemly, and it's an awful pity they can't come to agreements before it comes to public Donnybrooks like this. My part in the Donnybrook is merely to interview people, ask them what to say, and report it to you. In this particular case, very happily reporting it to you without editing of any person involved in the cast of characters. We still will be very interested to see what happens to Mr. Barrett this afternoon. Whether or not he goes back to the House, whether or not he is allowed into the House, or whether or not it will be regarded as a mere suspension for part of the day, which is the normal procedure if a member is not physically ejected. And in the meantime, of course, we lose sight of the other public business which lies presumably impatiently on the table. And I'll be back after the break. The Speaker has already denied to reporters that there was any collusion. Mr. Barrett will not go back into the House until he has a letter of explanation from the Speaker himself as to what particular type of suspension he suffered. Tomorrow, hate to tell you, Bill Ritchie, the new Municipal Affairs Minister, and a couple of top people in the college profession who are very worried about social credit legislation. Webster, in full flower at 9 a.m. precisely. An angry Barrett on check at midnight. What was all that? What's for Jack Finnbogason's title? An angry Dave Barrett of the NDP on check at midnight. Bill Ritchie, the brand new Municipal Affairs Minister, on Webster at 9 a.m. precisely.